Maxine Bourdreau was 54 years old, and she had just been handed a piece of paper that ended 29 years in 4 lines of legal text. Not with a fight, not with shouting across a kitchen or a slammed door, or even the long cold silence that she had learned to read like weather. Just an envelope left on the counter beside the dish rack, already dry from the morning, with her name written on it in her husband's careful hand. The same hand that had signed every Christmas card and every birthday check and every mortgage renewal for nearly 3 decades. Inside was a petition for divorce, already filed, already processed, and a note that said he had moved in with someone named Courtney, who worked at the branch office in Baton Rouge, and that he hoped Maxine would understand that some people simply grow in different directions. Some people simply grow in different directions. She read it twice. She set it down on the counter next to the dish rack. She picked up her coffee cup, realized it was empty, and washed it and set it upside down to dry. There was $214 in the checking account they had shared for 29 years, because Rayford had been quietly moving money into an account she didn't know about for the better part of 8 months. She found this out later, from a lawyer she could not afford, who told her gently that Rayford had been very organized about it. Rayford had always been very organized. And there was something else. There was a thing that lived underneath the divorce, underneath the $214, underneath Courtney from the Baton Rouge office. A thing that Maxine had carried for 37 years and had never once unpacked, because some things you carry not because they are light, but because you have forgotten what it would feel like to set them down. Her mother, Cecile Bourdreau, born Thibodeau, had been a woman who ran a roadside diner on the 2-lane highway between Jennings and Welsh in the flat, wet prairie of southwestern Louisiana. Maxine had grown up in that diner, had cleared its tables, and refilled its coffee, and wiped its counter from the time she was tall enough to reach it. And when Cecile died of a stroke at the age of 71, she had left the diner to Maxine, who had not been back to that stretch of highway in 11 years, who had a life in Lafayette with a husband named Rayford, who wanted no part of a grease-soaked building on a road that most people had forgotten existed. She had told the attorney to list it. The attorney had come back 3 weeks later and told her, apologetically, that the parish assessor had valued the property at $900. $900, he said. Though they both understood that number was a kind of fiction, the county told itself to have something on paper. Nobody, the attorney said, was going to buy a diner on a road nobody drove anymore. The diner had sat there for 11 years, locked and still and forgotten, the way things sit when nobody can decide what to do with them and everyone is too busy to make the decision. Maxine had not thought about it once in all that time. She had been busy being a wife. Now she was not a wife anymore. She had $214. She had 6 boxes and 2 suitcases, which was what 29 years looked like when you were the one who had to pack them. She moved into a spare room at her friend Deanna's house, in a neighborhood where the live oaks grew so thick over the street that the light came through green and underwater even in the afternoon. And she sat on the edge of the bed in that room at night and thought about what came next. There was nothing that came next. That was the whole problem. She was 54 years old and had not worked outside the house in 26 years because Rayford had said there was no need, and she had believed him because she loved him and because believing him was easier than the alternative, which was to look directly at all the things she had quietly given up and decide what they were worth. She had given up 11 years of clearing tables and pouring coffee, which she had been good at. She had given up a diner on a road nobody drove. She had given up being her mother's daughter in any way that required her to go back to that flat, wet, insect-loud stretch of Louisiana highway and stand in the building where she had grown up and feel all the things she had spent 37 years deciding not to feel. Her mother had not been a warm woman. That is the most honest way to say it. Cecile Bourdreau had been capable and stubborn and funny, in a dry, sideways way that only people who knew her well could catch. She had run the diner for 40 years with the same 3 employees and had never once, in all of Maxine's memory, said the words "I love you" to another human being. She had expressed love the way some people express religion, quietly, through action, through showing up, through the doing of things that need to be done without being asked and without expecting to be thanked. She had braided Maxine's hair every morning for 12 years without ever once being asked. She had driven 90 miles in a thunderstorm to bring Maxine a coat she had left at home during her first winter at college. She had sent a check every month for 2 years after the wedding when she knew The way mothers always know that things were not quite right yet, and she had never once mentioned the checks or asked for acknowledgement. She was not warm. She was something more permanent than warm. But Maxine had spent so many years wanting the warmth that she had never properly understood the permanence. When the stroke came, it came fast, and the last conversation Maxine had with her mother was over the phone on a Sunday evening, about a leaking pipe under the diner's back sink. Cecile had fixed the pipe herself with a wrench and a piece of plumber's tape and had told Maxine about it, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has never once waited for someone else to fix her problems. That had been the last conversation. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Maxine had not gone back to the diner. She had told herself she would, and then she hadn't, and enough time had passed that going felt harder than not going. And she had chosen the easier thing. The way she had chosen easier things her whole life, and now here she was with $214 and 6 boxes, and a room in Deanna's house with green underwater light coming through the window in the afternoons. If this story is already settling into a place you recognize, we're glad you're here. Subscribe to Giant Stories so you never miss the ones that matter. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Now let's get back to Maxine. On a Thursday in October, the same kind of October that comes to Louisiana late and half-hearted, the air still thick and smelling of wet earth, the light going golden only reluctantly, Maxine got a letter. It was forwarded from the old address in Lafayette, which meant Rayford had done that much at least. The return address was from a woman named Felice Arsenault, who identified herself as having been her mother's bookkeeper for the last 22 years. Maxine had not known her mother had a bookkeeper. She called the number in the letter. A woman answered on the second ring, older, with a voice that moved slow and deliberate the way voices move in that part of Louisiana, like the water moves there, like it has all the time in the world and knows it. Felice Arsenault said she had been meaning to reach out for some time, but hadn't known how to locate Maxine after the house in Lafayette sold. She said there was something Maxine needed to see, something in the diner that Cecile had left specifically for her. Not the building, not the equipment, something else. Something her mother had asked Felice to make sure reached her daughter, no matter what. What is it? Maxine asked. A book, Felice said. A ledger, I guess you'd call it. Your mother kept it under the counter for 40 years. I looked through enough of it to know it wasn't for me to read the rest. It was for you. Maxine sat for a long moment in Deanna's spare room with the green light coming through the curtains. She had $214 and no job and nowhere she needed to be. She bought a bus ticket for the following morning with $37 of the $214. The bus followed the interstate west out of Lafayette and then dropped south through the flat country where the land goes low and wet, and the water sits in the fields like something that has made up its mind to stay. Maxine watched it through the window, with a feeling she couldn't name exactly. A feeling like approaching something you left unfinished a long time ago, and discovering it has been waiting, patient and still, in exactly the place you left it. The bus let her off in Jennings, and she rented a car with a credit card that had $400 left on its limit, and she drove the 2-lane west through the cane fields, and the cow pastures, and the places where the road dips and the water runs over it in wet season, and after 20 minutes she saw it. The diner sat back from the road on a gravel lot shaded by 2 water oaks, so old their roots had buckled the asphalt on either side of the front steps. The building was low and long, painted white once, now the color of old chalk. The sign above the door read, in letters that had once been red, Cecile's, and below it a smaller line that time had faded to almost nothing. Maxine had to get out of the car and walk close to read it. She leaned in. The smaller line said, hot plate, hot coffee, come in, as though the place had been waiting all this time for someone to accept the invitation. The screen door was unlocked. Maxine pushed it open and stepped inside. The diner was one long room with a counter running the length of it, and 8 booths along the window side. The counter stools were the same ones Maxine remembered from childhood, red vinyl, the kind with the chrome ring around the base. 4 of them had cracked and been repaired with electrical tape at some point, neatly done, the tape flush, and careful the way her mother did everything. The booths had checkered tablecloths that someone had covered with plastic sheeting before closing up, and the plastic had yellowed, but the cloths beneath it were still the same red and white. She had eaten breakfast on every morning of her childhood. The coffee maker behind the counter was clean. The grill was covered with a piece of canvas, also clean. The reach-in cooler was empty and unplugged, its door propped open to keep it from going sour inside. Someone had maintained this place. Not renovated, not modernized, just maintained. The steady, quiet maintenance of someone who understood that a building, like most living things, only needs to be kept from being destroyed by neglect. Felice Arsenault was already there, sitting in the last booth with a cup of gas station coffee and a canvas bag on the seat beside her. She was a small woman in her late 60s, wearing a yellow blouse and reading glasses on a beaded chain, with the look of a woman who has kept other people's secrets so long that discretion has become indistinguishable from her natural face. She stood when Maxine came in. She did not say she was sorry for Maxine's troubles, though Maxine could tell she knew about them. She only said, "I'm glad you came," and reached into the canvas bag and set a ledger on the table between them. It was old. The cover was dark green cloth, gone soft at the corners from decades of handling. The spine had been retaped twice. A rubber band held it shut, and when Felice removed the rubber band, it left a pale mark across the cover, the way rubber bands do when they have been in one place for a very long time. "Take your time," Felice said, and moved to the counter to give her room. Maxine sat down in the booth. The plastic crinkled under the checkered cloth. Outside, a car went by on the 2-lane, the first one since she'd arrived. She opened the ledger, her mother's handwriting, small, right-leaning, every letter formed with the same deliberate pressure of a woman who had taught herself to write properly from a library book and had never trusted herself to be careless about it. The first page had a date, 1974, and a heading that said, simply, "The Book." She turned the page. Before we tell you what Maxine found inside her mother's ledger, if this story is speaking to you, take 1 second to hit subscribe, and leave us a comment below telling us where you're watching from. It's people like you who keep giant stories going. Now, let's go back to Maxine and the book. The ledger was not an accounting record. There were no columns of figures, no running balances. What was on the pages was something else entirely. Line after line, in Cecile's careful right-leaning hand, was a date, a name or a description, and a short sentence or two. The entries went back to 1974 and ran forward one after another, filling the pages in a slow and steady accumulation the way a creek fills stone by stone over decades. March 1974. A family of 5, car trouble on the highway, 2 nights rain, 8 supper 3 nights, no charge. Gave them the road atlas from behind the counter. August 1977. A young man, maybe 19, walking to Texas, no shoes worth mentioning. Fed him 4 days, gave him the pair of boots in the back that Louis left here 2 years ago. Left him $20 in the boots where he would not find it until he was down the road. January 1979. A woman and a little girl, January cold. Would not say where she was going. Stayed in the storeroom 3 nights on the camp cot. I did not ask. When she left, I gave her the quilt from the shelf. She cried and I told her don't. It was a spare, Maxine read. She read for a long time, not moving, not looking up. Outside, the water oaks shifted in the October wind and their shadows moved across the floor of the diner in long, slow sweeps. The ledger was 40 years of people. 40 years of people who had come in off that 2-lane highway when they had nowhere else to go, and something had needed to happen before they could continue. A trucker who had driven without sleep for 36 hours and could not hold the wheel anymore. A teenager who had run away and run out of running at the same time. An old man wandering, clearly lost, whom Cecile had kept for 2 weeks, feeding him and calling every senior center in the parish until she found the granddaughter who had not known he was missing. A migrant family who had stopped to ask directions and ended up eating every meal at the counter for 4 days, while the father's back healed enough for him to work. Entry after entry, year after year. People who arrived depleted and left with something. A meal, a night's sleep, a pair of boots with $20 hidden in them, a quilt from the shelf, and threaded through the entries, in the margins and between the lines, in a slightly shakier hand that told Maxine these had been added later, were follow-up notes. The kind a woman keeps when she has continued to wonder about someone. The family of 5. The youngest girl wrote me a letter in 1981. She is in school in Shreveport. She sent a drawing of the diner. The young man with no shoes found work in Texas. He sent a Christmas card every year for 11 years. Then the card stopped. I think about him sometimes on his birthday, which he told me was in June. The woman and the little girl. She called in 1986. The little girl's name is Danielle. They are safe. She said she named her daughter that because I said to her in the dark of the storeroom when she was afraid that the only thing that mattered was getting the child somewhere safe. She remembered the word. Maxine's hands were shaking by this time. She had not noticed when they had started. She turned more pages. The entries got closer together as the diner's reputation. She understood now that there was a reputation, quiet and unspoken and passed along the highway like all true reputations are, person to person, without advertising, had grown. More people, more needs, more of her mother's patient practicality, the camp cot, the shelf quilt, the $20 in the boots, a meal, another meal, and another. And then 2/3 through the ledger, she found an entry she was not prepared for. September 1983. Maxine left for college today. Sent her with the blue suitcase and $40 I did not tell her about in the inside pocket. She will find it when she needs it. She has always been harder on herself than she should be. She is the best thing I ever did. I do not tell her this enough, or at all. I am not good at saying such things out loud. I will try to do better. Below it, in the same shakier ink that marked the later editions, a single line. I did not do better. I am sorry for it. Maxine set the ledger down on the checkered tablecloth. She pressed both hands flat on the table. The plastic crinkled softly. Outside, a truck went by on the 2-lane and the whole building trembled faintly in its wake, the way roadside buildings do. Not in fear, just in acknowledgement, just in the way of things that have lived long enough beside roads that they have learned to absorb the passing and go still again. She had found the $40. She had been 3 weeks into the fall semester, down to her last few dollars, and she had reached into the inside pocket of the blue suitcase looking for a pen. And the 2 folded 20s had been there, and she had cried in her dorm room alone at the shock of it, the precision of it, her mother's knowledge of exactly when she would need it. And she had called home that night, and Cecile had said only, "Good, you found it," and had immediately changed the subject to the leaking pipe under the back sink. That was the last time the 2 of them had said anything that mattered. Not from lack of trying, from lack of knowing how. Maxine was crying now. Not from grief entirely, though grief was in it. She was crying from the particular kind of pain that comes when you have misread something important for a very long time, and then the correction arrives all at once, and the relief and the loss come together in the same moment, and you cannot tell them apart. Felice had come back to the booth, without Maxine noticing. She set a cup of coffee, real coffee, not gas station. She must have brought a small pot, on the table beside the ledger. She sat across from Maxine and did not say anything, the way a woman sits with another woman who is crying and understands that the best help is just to stay. After a while, Maxine asked, "Did you know about all of this?" Felice said, "I knew the ledger existed. Your mother never showed it to me, but I kept her books for 22 years and I knew there were amounts that didn't reconcile, that went out of the register and couldn't be accounted for as supplies or overhead. I knew she wasn't stealing from herself. I just never asked." She looked at Maxine over the rim of her coffee cup. "I should tell you something else," she said. "The reason I reached out now, besides the ledger. A man came around about 3 weeks ago, a developer. He had a letter from a land group in Baton Rouge and he wanted to buy this property. He said the old highway is being upgraded to a state corridor, and the land along it is going to be valuable once the construction starts." "How valuable?" Maxine said. Felice looked at her steadily. "Valuable enough that he offered $55,000 for a building the parish values at $900. Maxine sat with that for a moment. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him the property belonged to Cecile Bourdros's daughter and that she would be in touch. I didn't tell him that I didn't know where you were. I thought you ought to know before anyone else got to you." Maxine looked down at the ledger. She looked at the coffee cup Felice had set beside it. She looked at the 8 booths with their plastic-covered checkered tablecloths and the 4 stools with their careful electrical tape, and the coffee maker behind the counter, clean and waiting. She picked up the ledger and turned to the back pages, the most recent entries. Her mother had stopped writing in 2012, the year before the stroke. The last entry read, November 2012. Man maybe 60, broke down on the shoulder. Engine gone. No phone. Ate supper and breakfast, called his son in DeRitter. The son came in the evening. The man cried when he saw him. He thought nobody was coming. I told him somebody always comes if there's a light on. The son shook my hand and wanted to pay for the tow. I said keep it. They left before dark. Below it, in a hand that trembled slightly more than earlier entries, one more line. I hope Maxine keeps the light on. She will understand what I mean when she is ready to. Maxine closed the ledger. She held it for a moment in both hands, the cloth cover worn soft as old flannel. Then she looked up at Felice. "What do you know about this developer?" she asked. Felice smiled, small and slow and careful, the smile of a woman who has been waiting to be asked exactly this question. His name is Renner, she said. Clint Renner. He came back twice and left a card. He is counting on you not knowing a few things your mother knew. And those things are, your mother owned this building outright. No mortgage, no lien. But more than that, she owned the well on this property, and the water rights that came with it, filed in 1969 when she bought the land. The parish upgraded the highway corridor map in 2018. This parcel is right at the junction of the new access road. The property is not worth $55,000, Maxine. A lawyer in Jennings told me last year, when I was trying to understand why developers kept parking in the lot and looking around, that the water rights alone, with the corridor access, put this land closer to $300,000. Maybe more if someone wants the junction. Maxine sat very still. Why didn't you? She started. I wasn't sure you would come, Felice said simply. And it wasn't mine to sell or protect. It was your mother's and now it's yours. There was more to understand, and it took Maxine the rest of that day and a phone call to a property lawyer in Lake Charles to understand all of it. Her mother, it turned out, had done something that Cecile Bourdreau would do. Had done it quietly years ago, without telling anyone, and had left it in place like a foundation no one had thought to look for. In 2008, when Cecile was 65 years old and already aware that her health was not what it had been. She had gone to a lawyer in Jennings and done two things. The first was that she had placed a deed restriction on the property, stating that the building could only be used as a food service establishment, open to the general public, which was her practical way of making certain that whoever owned it after her could not simply raise it and put up a cell tower or a storage facility. Any commercial redevelopment would require a legal challenge to the restriction that the lawyer said, frankly, would be more trouble than most developers would find worth their time. The second thing she had done was set up a small account, funded by 37 years of setting aside whatever she could from the register, never more than the place needed. The account held $88,400. It was designated for the maintenance and reopening of the diner, and Maxine was the named beneficiary, and it had been sitting in a credit union in Jennings for 7 years waiting for Maxine to be ready, to know about it. Her mother had built a floor under everything, quietly, without announcement, in the way of a woman who does not trust the world to hold things up on its own, and so quietly ensures that they are held. Clint Renner came back on the third day. He drove a gray truck, new, the kind of truck that announces itself. He was a lean man in his 50s with the careful friendliness of someone who has learned to lead with a smile, because it keeps people from looking at his hands. He found Maxine in the diner, on her knees scrubbing the baseboards with a brush, and he did not revise his expression fast enough when he saw that. He had come expecting a woman who had not yet decided, and who could be moved. He sat in the nearest booth without being invited, and put his card on the table, and said he understood she was going through a difficult period, and that he wanted to make this simple for her. He said the building was old, and would require significant investment to bring up to code, and that he had contractors who could give her estimates if she wanted, just so she could see what she would be looking at. He said $55,000 was a generous offer for a property in this condition, and she should not wait too long, because these corridor projects moved quickly once the state approved the easement, and she might find the opportunity had passed. Maxine sat back on her heels and looked at him for a moment. She said, "Mr. Renner, what is it you want this land for?" he said. "The access road, ma'am. Highway corridor junction, commercial development, nothing complicated." She said, "You want the water rights." His smile did not move, but something behind it did. She said, "You know about the deed restriction, which means you've already had someone look at the title. You know what it says, and you were hoping I didn't. You drove out here twice to talk to a woman you expected to be desperate, and I appreciate that you can read a situation, because you are not wrong that I am having a difficult year. But my mother built this floor before she died, and I am standing on it, and there is nothing here for you to buy." She stood up from the floor and walked to the counter and set down the scrub brush and looked at him from across the room. She said, "I'd like you to leave now." He sat in the booth for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to last for him to understand that she meant it. Then he picked up his card from the table, which was the detail that told her the most. A man who picks up his own card on the way out has accepted that there will be no deal. And he walked out the screen door and drove away. Maxine stood at the counter and listened to the truck engine fade on the 2-lane. And then there was only the water oaks and the wind through them, and the particular silence of a building that has been still for a long time, and is not yet sure it is allowed to be otherwise. She stayed. Not in a single clear decision, but the way her mother had run the diner for 40 years. By showing up the next morning and doing the next necessary thing. She filed the paperwork to reopen the food service license with the parish. She had the gas line inspected and the hood system serviced, and the cooler plugged back in and tested. She drove to the credit union in Jennings with the account documents and sat across from a young man who looked at the balance and then at her and said, somewhat formally, "We've been holding this for a while." "I know," Maxine said. "I'm ready now." There was a young woman who worked at the gas station half a mile up the road, 22 years old, named Suzette, who had grown up in the parish and who stopped in one afternoon to see what was happening with the old Cecile's place. She stood in the doorway and looked around and said her grandmother used to eat here, and did Maxine need any help? Suzette had the quality of stillness that made her seem older than she was, a watchfulness, a way of assessing a room before she entered it fully. Maxine would learn later that she had been living in her car for 6 weeks after a situation at home that Suzette did not discuss and did not need to discuss in order for Maxine to understand the shape of it. She hired her on the first day. She did not offer her the storage room and the camp cot the way her mother might have. Because the storage room was full of equipment she had not yet sorted through. Instead, she handed Suzette the key to the diner and told her she was welcome to sleep in the back booth if she needed to, while she figured out next steps, and that there was no need to mention it to anyone and no need to explain. Suzette looked at her for a long moment. "How did you know?" she said. Maxine said, "I worked in a diner my whole childhood. I know what a person looks like when they need a place to land." The diner opened on a Wednesday in December, which is not an auspicious day or an auspicious month for opening a restaurant. But Maxine had learned from her mother that the right time to open a door is when you are ready to keep it open and not before. She did not advertise. She put the sign out, turned on the lights, brewed the coffee, and unlocked the screen door. By 9 that morning, a man had stopped for coffee on his way to a job site in Iowa, Louisiana. And by noon 4 people had come in from habit, the word having traveled up and down the 2-lane the way such words always travel in small parishes, which is to say quickly and without any help from the internet. They came back, and they told others. The first time an old customer walked in and stopped in the doorway and looked around and said, slow and quiet, "I used to eat here when I was a kid. I didn't know it was open again." Maxine felt something settle in her chest that she did not have a word for, not happiness exactly. More like alignment. Like a door hanging slightly off true for many years that has finally been lifted and hung plumb. She found the people who came back to thank her mother the way they had found the wagon wheel. Word traveling along old roads, arriving in 1s and 2s, tentative, holding something in their hands they had carried a long time. An older woman who came in one Tuesday and sat at the counter and said she had eaten supper here for free one winter in 1981, when she had nothing and her 2 children were hungry, and the woman behind the counter had not asked a single question and had given them the corn booth and fed them 3 nights running. She had come to say thank you and had not known, until she'd pulled into the lot, that the woman behind the counter was gone. Maxine brought out the ledger. She turned to 1981 and found the entry and slid the book across the counter. The woman put her finger on the line of careful right-leaning ink. A woman and 2 children, 3 nights no charge. She is afraid. I did not ask. The little one said thank you and I told her that's what we're here for. The woman's shoulders shook. Maxine looked at the window to give her privacy. Outside, a truck went by on the 2-lane, and the building trembled softly in its wake and went still. Others came. A man who had been the teenager walking to Texas, now in his 50s, who had driven up from Beaumont specifically because someone had mentioned to him that the old place on 90 was open again. He still had the boots, he said. He had kept them. He'd never been able to throw them away. Maxine showed him his entry in the ledger. He looked at the line, gave him the boots with $20 in the toe, told him he'd earn it back someday, and he said, "I looked for that $20 for 3 weeks before I found it. I thought I was imagining things. I bought groceries in Beaumont with that money, and it was the first time in 6 months I had eaten something I didn't take off a shelf without paying." He paid for his lunch twice over and left before Maxine could argue about it. She was learning things about her mother she had not known. The customers who came back told her things that Cecile had never said, That she laughed more than you'd expect, a short bark of laughter at things that shouldn't be that funny. That she had been known for keeping the diner's back room stocked with goods donated by the churches in town, quietly and without anyone making a production of it. Because that is how useful help works best. That she had spent 17 years on a first-name basis with the sheriff's office dispatcher, and knew how to make a call that got someone safe somewhere, without a great deal of official involvement, when a situation called for discretion rather than paperwork. Maxine had grown up watching her mother do all of these things, and had not understood any of them. She understood now. She understood the way you understand things only, after you have been down to the bottom of yourself and come back up with different eyes. There was a night in February, the first cold week of that winter, when a pickup truck pulled off the 2-lane at 11 at night, with a woman inside who had a split lip and a child asleep in a car seat in the back. The diner was long closed. Maxine was sitting at the counter with the ledger, going through the oldest entries by the light of the lamp, which she had taken to doing in the evenings the way some people read. She heard the truck on the gravel, and she looked out the window, and she saw the woman sit in the truck for a long time without getting out. The way people sit when they have run out of road, and can't make themselves stop moving, but have nowhere left to go. Maxine unlocked the screen door and turned on the light over the counter. She did not go out to the truck. She let the light do the work. After a few minutes, the truck door opened. Maxine brewed coffee and warmed milk for the child and did not ask a single question. She remembered the entry from 1979. I did not ask, and she understood now what that had cost her mother in self-restraint. Because Maxine wanted badly to ask, wanted to understand, wanted to help in a direct and quantifiable way. But she had learned from the ledger that the most useful help is often the help that doesn't require the person to explain themselves first. She gave them the corner booth, which was the largest, and she put a blanket over the sleeping child, and she sat at the counter while they rested, the same way her mother had once sat, a second presence against the dark, so that no one in the corner booth was alone in it. In the morning she wrote them down in the ledger. She had bought a new ledger, green cloth to match her mother's, and she had transferred the first entry, March 1974, a family of 5, to the new book by hand, and then she had continued the entries where her mother had left off, in her own handwriting, smaller and less deliberate than Cecile's but steady. She wrote, February, a woman and a child, stayed the night, coffee and milk for the little one. In the morning I gave her the number for the Women's Resource Office in Jennings and $50 from the register, which I will account for later as miscellaneous. She said she didn't know there was still a place like this on this road. I said my mother made sure there would always be. She closed the ledger and put it under the counter, next to the register where her mother had kept it for 40 years. She went to the door and looked out at the 2-lane in the early gray light. The road was empty in both directions, running flat and straight through the cane fields toward a horizon that was just beginning to go pink. Somewhere down that road, Rayford was living a life with someone named Courtney, who worked at the branch office. Somewhere the $214 had become something larger, not a fortune, nothing like that, but enough, carefully used, carefully maintained, the way her mother had always done everything. Somewhere a man named Renner was finding another piece of land to develop, a simpler one, where the owner didn't know what they were standing on. Maxine stood in the doorway of her mother's diner, with the coffee maker breathing behind her, and the water oaks moving in the early morning wind, and the light coming up pink and then orange and then gold over the flat country. She thought about the entry in the ledger, the one written about her, the one she had carried without knowing it for 37 years. She is the best thing I ever did. I do not tell her this enough, or at all. She had spent 37 years not knowing that line existed. She had spent 29 years married to a man who organized his betrayal carefully, and left her with $214, and the shell of something she had given most of herself to. She had spent her whole life being the kind of woman who disappears slowly into the life someone else designs. And she had not noticed herself disappearing until there was very little left. And then she had come to the flat, wet prairie of southwestern Louisiana and stood in her mother's diner, with a ledger that held 40 years of people. Her mother had not turned away, and she had understood the thing that had always been true, and that she had somehow needed to lose everything else before she could see. Her mother had left her the diner the same way she had left everything else, not as a gift, as a trust, as a door held open from one side, waiting for someone to come through from the other. The road outside was beginning to catch the morning light. A truck went by heading east, its running lights still on in the early gray. And Maxine watched it go and thought of all the people on all the roads at all hours who do not know yet that there is a place to stop, who are still running, still hoping, still trying to outrun the thing they are carrying. She thought of her mother, who had run a diner on a road nobody drove and had fed people for 40 years, without once announcing that she was doing it, who had kept a book, who had left $20 in a blue suitcase where a 22-year-old girl would find it 3 weeks into her first fall away from home, exactly when she needed it. That was how Cecile Bourdreau had said what she could not say out loud. With boots and blankets and $20 in a blue suitcase. With coffee at 11 at night when a woman sat in a truck in the gravel lot, trying to figure out where to go. With a ledger under the counter that no one knew about until the daughter who needed it most was finally ready to read it. Maxine went back inside and turned up the lamp and opened the ledger to the next blank page. She picked up the pen. Outside, another truck went by and the water oaks bent and the building trembled faintly and went still. She wrote the date. She wrote, "The light is on, the door is open, we're here if you need us." Then below it, in the line her mother would have left blank, Maxine Bourdreau continuing. She capped the pen, she set it down. She brewed the first pot of the morning, and when it was ready she set it on the burner, the way her mother had always done, at the end of the counter nearest the door, so the smell of it reached all the way out to the gravel lot. A small thing, a thing that costs almost nothing, a thing that tells anyone pulling off the road in the gray of the morning that here, someone is already awake. Here, something is already warm. Here, if you can only make it this far, you do not have to arrive alone.